You're here to study Bridgman. This is recording 9 on bones and muscles from our 12-session Summer Bootcamp 2020. Updates, as usual, at marshallart.com. Hi, everybody. It is 12:01 p.m. in Southern California on July 25th, 2020, and this is the Bridgman Figure Drawing Bootcamp. I want to bring something up that might seem unrelated. There's a movie from 1931 called The Public Enemy. It was a Warner Brothers gangster film with James Cagney that William Wellman directed. And Martin Scorsese was talking about how he screened it for a group of actors that he was prepping for a film, including Leonardo DiCaprio. And this is a movie from 89 years ago. And DiCaprio and the young people that were there were so excited about it. And Martin Scorsese said, I wish that William Wellman, the director, could have been there to see that generations after he had done this movie, how well it held up for some audiences. I feel that way about the fact that there's all this interest in George Bridgman from 100 years later, that Bridgman did not know that 100 years later we would be doing this. But here we are. In honor of George. Little science fiction. Remember, at the time George was teaching, nobody had ever seen the world from outer space. Nobody knew what this planet looked like from out there. Whole different world, and here we are connected by way of this stuff. Today is the body as machine and major muscle groups. We'll begin by looking at homework. Not all of them, but about 5 or 6 of them, about half of them. And then after that, we'll begin with a kind of a dessert. Since yesterday we looked more at anatomical plates than we looked at Bridgman, we'll make up for that today by looking for the landmark points in some Bridgman drawings and taking time with them. Okay, your assignment was to memorize the skeleton. Major bones, relative proportions, landmarks, and joint connections. We're going to take up this joint connections more in the middle of this class today when we get to body as machine, which we will within a half hour. Draw skeletons as sticks or forms. If you memorize the skeleton, well, you've got to do that. If you're a physical therapist or a yoga teacher or a doctor or any one of a number of other professions, it's not going to mean you can draw them. Now we get to the business of drawing them. And if you're new and you just draw stick figures, that's okay. If those stick figures are based on bones, it's only a matter of time, if you keep at it and you are trying to get the three-dimensional illusion, that you can construct the sticks as forms. You've got a lot of knowledge of how to do it. Let's see how some of you did it. Starting with Luca, because this looks to me like you had some fun, and you played, and you got rhythms. And I know that you were aware of at least some of these rhythms, and I want to show why I am quite confident, is that over here we've got a convex femur. And here we've got a concave femur. And I think that you chose to do that so you could make a little hook and then reverse it again and then go like that. It's sort of like what you do when you write a song or tell a joke or have something that's going to surprise you at some point. I don't know that, but I'm looking at these and it seems like you've given some thought both to the graphic and the 3D. Those are really good, Luca. Very impressive. Sudipta says, I always find pelvis difficult to draw. Here I tried 2 different methods. I like the bucket method that Proko mentioned in his videos. The bucket method is a good method. It is not as precise unless you're advanced, because ellipses are more difficult than boxes, even though people don't think they are, to know that the center line is there on that side, and over on the other side, we have to have a line that would make sense, that would touch that one over on the other side, and then we'd find the center line on the front. We have to line that stuff up. This is harder for most people because the straight lines confront, but that was good. If any of you did form skeletons like this, and they came out with that much awareness of that spool there and this more foreshortened spool there, you learned. Let's see, Olivia, the blue lines are the landmarks. Would you be able to tell me how to turn the stick figures into form? We will spend some time on it later. But yeah, you're already doing it with the big masses. Let's do this for everybody, anyone who's new, and those of you who are more advanced. Let's give us a moment. That arm, I think, is coming toward me. And to do the rubber band thing tells me that. And by the position of that hand, it could be that this medial epicondyle, that's an important landmark. It could be that the end of that croquet mallet is in a position like that. And that this bump on the end there is going to stick out. But it could be that if this person swiveled their arm around, that's what we're going to get to today. It could be that that arm would be coming toward us, the humerus would be coming toward us, and the croquet hammer part of the mallet would be facing that way, and the medial epicondyle would be aiming down. It would put the arm in a different position. Turning that upper arm into a croquet mallet. This arm is going away from us, no doubt about that. No, well, there could be doubt about it. It could be that a person is bringing it toward us from that position. But typically, when the arm swings back, that is going to go away from us. Now, Olivia, I wanted to say something. For any of you who are careful, any of you who are this much paying attention to things, that is responsible, dedicated care, admirable. Some of you need to do that. If all you do is these gestural quick ones, and you avoid this because it's going to make you have to slow down and think, and people gave you grief in school over it, you don't have to do this. But if you want to get good at inventing, this is part of it. And if you want to get fast at inventing and free with inventing, like this, two different sides of the human experience. Every little kid does this. Every little kid is going to do this when they hear certain kinds of music. And how long does it take them to figure it out? Well, a few years, actually, to get the coordination. But we're doing the same thing on paper that the little kid does with its body. We're dancing around and playing around, and then you are slowing down. But Etienne, one thing to do, one thing to get in the habit of doing. It's been attributed to Chuck Jones. I think Chuck Jones did say this. I just looked it up on the internet and I couldn't find it. But I remember it. It was put a striped sock on everything. You can always take it off later. What's he mean? When you're cartooning characters, if this is closer to me, put a striped sock on it. Now I know. Look how that makes that illusion. You see how this is coming toward me? And this one's coming toward me more. How do I know it's coming toward me more? It's shorter. And anything that's going away from me, if that is going away from me, put a striped sock on it. You can always take it off later. Well, why would you care if you can always take it off later? Because you'll then know what overlaps what. You'll know that that is likely down there to be overlapping the thing behind it. It could have been the other way around. It could be that this is coming toward us and that foot is closer to us. And if that foot is closer to us, Well, we're going to know that it would be closer to us because that rubber band told us that's coming toward us, and this is closer to us still. Okay, Olivia, that's also in answer to your drawing. This was harder than I thought. I experimented with different speeds. The ones I enjoyed the most were the quick, spontaneous ones, of course. It's more fun to just wiggle around than it is to have to learn precise dance steps. We've moved from the military to the dance hall. But having to get exactly in step with the partner and having to hit the exact point at the exact time takes failure and failure and failure until you get it right. And then there's a satisfaction that leads to a greater failure because there was too much confidence. And this rhythm of going back and forth is part of it. Yeah, of course, these are likely to be more fun for one kind of person. Another kind of person, they can be tough. Phoenix, you put landmark points on there, or at least some. They don't show up as that bright a blue, but the landmark points, the landmark areas for developed figure drawing will be really useful. Okay, and Jonathan, good job. Look at this, everybody. That's a width line. How do you draw a person who looks like they're doing a push-up on the ground and make it 3D? Well, this person happens to be conveniently symmetrical. When a person is conveniently symmetrical, it's not that different than drawing an appliance or a spaceship or an automobile or something like that, because one side will be the same as the other. And so now look what we've done. We've got X and we've got two variants of Z. These two go back. They come in on X. They taper on X, but the Z would be right there in the middle. Okay, we're 2/3 of the way done. What else? Oh, we need something that goes up and then back to X and then down. And look at that. That right there, that alone gives us enough of a scaffolding to start to place things. What about that pelvis? Let's use the bucket and find something that is in an angle maybe, sorry about the axes of my lips being off. I know they are. But if you say, where do I start? Start simple. It's harder to do that with something like this. But that's where we turn it into these things. Now, I'm saying that because these are they aren't a lot of straight lines. They aren't Scott Robertson kind of analytical diagrams. But the simplifying the pelvis, we got that bucket thing, we got that box thing. Andrew Loomis simplifies the pelvis with kind of a propeller blade approach, like that. Brings them together there, be a little thing inside there, finds a corner there, still gets that triangle on the front, brings a great trochanter out of there. There's different ways to do it. But I remember one time when I was teaching this back in the late 90s and gave about 4 or 5 different form suggestions for the pelvis. One student said, this is too confusing. There's too many of them. And I thought, yeah, you're right. What do we got to do? I talked with my old mentor who had taught anatomy for many years. I said, what do you do about the confusion of it? He says, you got to have more than one, but one of them has to be the box. And that made sense to me because the box is the one you can track lines on. Anyway, you've done fine. I wanted everybody to see these. I know you did work this week and last night and yesterday, even during class. And so now you know this skeleton. If you memorize the major bones means that you don't need to know that there are 12 ribs on a human, 13 on most dogs and cats, 18 on a horse. You don't need to know that there are that many on there. You might want to know that the 8th rib is going to be the one that makes the peak of the curve. That might be nice to know. But even if you didn't know that, and you just knew that it was an egg, that's good enough. You should know the sternum because that is a landmark point. You should know this corner. Watch this corner, and that corner isn't right on the front. Look where it is. It's a little back on Z. That's useful to know. And so this wide area that you'd keep track of when you're creating form. This very important point, this very important area. Yesterday, we looked at it. Now, we're going to do more. If you say, I wanted more anatomy, I wanted more bones. There's only so much time. We will get closer to the scapula. And when we do, we will notice its spine. That's called the spine of the scapula. It is tappable on the fleshed figure. It is subcutaneous. So you've got to know that. And this vertebral border, which actually makes a little more than a 90-degree angle, a little more open than 90 degrees. That is not necessarily tappable. It can be if you spread your shoulders around. It can be a groove when you pull your shoulders back and these muscles bundle up. It can stick out when you stretch your shoulders out and you pull all of that muscle over it. We will look closer at the scapula next week on Friday. We will get closer to the pelvis, and we will name the ischiums. These are the ischiums, those donuts that are in a particular position. Watch this line. I'm going to show you why that striped sock on a thing is important. I didn't put a striped sock on it, but I made a curve like that. So now watch this next one. To draw a donut, do you see how that almost looks three-dimensional? Why? Because of this. That line is closer to us than the other one. And then as soon as I do something like this, and like that, and like that, and then at some point like that, it's going to start to change directions, we get the illusion of a three-dimensional form. That's how that ischium is positioned. It's close at the front, spreads apart on X behind. The ilium, this one up here, does the opposite. It's wide at the front, and as it goes around, it gets closer together, closer to the other one. We're going to look at that. And we are going to distinguish between this important ASIS, anterior superior iliac spine, and we're going to make a big deal of this bump. This bump, that is the AIIS, the anterior inferior iliac spine, because it is out of that, as we'll see even today. We will see that is from that point underneath the anterior superior iliac spine, that the straight muscle of the femur is going to emerge from between two other muscles, sartorius and tensor. And Bridgman will chisel that up into three-dimensionality like nobody I've ever seen. I saw Vilpu do a video of it, but it was Bridgman who seemed to have just turned that into some of the strangest architecture, but you become very aware of how that works. Okay, we're orienting. AIIS, ASIS, as lazy people call it. Those names are such poetry that we should never miss an opportunity with Robert Beverly Hale to say the anterior superior iliac spine. One more. The knees. We looked at the knees yesterday. Now, one point of this slide is that Bridgman's knees, this isn't my favorite of his knees, but those of you who have gone through the book and you've looked at those knees, they are just some of the most, the strongest, the most impressive, bigger-than-life knees. There's also points where he doesn't even put in the cross contour. But look at that little line I made right there. That is an awareness that this rectus femoris has a side plane. And then he'll do this, and then he'll cut into there, and then he'll go like that. And that's an awareness that there's a big belly of the muscle, and he leaves out the information of the outline. We don't want to do that in study. In study, we want to know how this extensor group goes around there. And watch, you could even do multiple bumps. We'll study this a little bit today, but more next week. That's the tibialis anterior. And then watch the next part. That goes straight back because that's bone in there. And then it grips that gastrocnemius and goes around there like that. That can help you to light it. If the light's coming from this side, you might get a little core shadow. You'd get a strip of shade in there. You might catch a little light right here. But if it were the opposite, if the light were coming from this way, you'd get a strip of light here. And then you'd get a bit of a core shadow there, and then this part. In fact, all of this area here would go into shadow. Why? How do you know that? You know it because you've studied anatomy. You know there is a group of extensors with separate names, but you can think of them as a big stretched out egg, a bone, and then another group of muscles there, and the cross contour, which makes it look thick, also gives you insights into light. Now, I can't do that with every part of the body. We're doing it with a number of parts of the body. The point of this is get an anatomy book or 3 to learn anatomy. It takes you through it sequentially and simply. And then, for inspiration, go to the great George Bridgman to get permission to mess around. Okay, let us move on to what I told you would be dessert. Go through your Bridgman collection and seek every bone landmark. This is a good drawing. I didn't used to like it. I thought that it didn't have enough detail when I first saw it 40 years ago. Now, the lack of detail is part of what I love about it so much in so little. Now, we're going to take several minutes with this drawing. But I'm going to do a little aside to a cultural issue, because it had another reason why I didn't like it. It was a guy flexing his muscles. Maybe that's a good thing, or it was in his time, but in my time, this was Charles Atlas. That may just be a name to you. If you were born any time in the 20th century after, say, 1925, about the time Bridgman did this, all the way through into the 70s, you probably knew who Charles Atlas was. This is one of those I lived back in the 20th century before the internet and even cable story. This was Charles Atlas. Everybody knew this guy. He was the icon of commercial male perfection. And by commercial, I mean he was selling a service, making men out of, how should we say it? Out of weaklings. Whoa, what's my job? I manufacture weaklings into men. Whoa, okay. Daring challenge. Can he do it with me? And he had these advertisements, the insult that made a man out of Mac, and Mac would be humiliated in front of girls. But then he'd take the Charles Atlas course and he'd go back and smack these bullies in the face. This was a part of United States mainstream culture for probably 60 years. The insult that turned a chump into a champ. Don't be half a man. I feel terrible that I've been teaching you. You only have to learn half a man and half a woman, and then everything else takes care of itself, in-betweens and the other half. Well, okay, in case you didn't know, that was my cultural contribution to your education today, is that this man, Charles Atlas, who every boy, almost every boy, wanted to be like that, the ideal of male perfection. But there came a point where it just didn't do it for me. So when I saw this Bridgman drawing, I had to get past the Charles Atlas thing. I actually like this better than Charles Atlas. All right, I want to show you another thing about this. He knows where that sternum starts and where it ends. Even though he doesn't draw the sternum, he knows it. There's another thing we saw yesterday. He accents this part and 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 this part. And it's as if he's a musician tapping out a rhythm, speeding it up as it goes around. But it's not just that he's changing the size of these. He didn't have to. He could have left that out the way he left out so many other parts. I think he's doing a little rhythmic dance. And he's giving it what people call continuity. That if you can find some hidden simple shapes in there, they help hold the thing together because they are continuous, even if they're hidden. It's like a rhythm that stops in music, but the music doesn't ignore the rhythm. It just doesn't, there's no drum beat. There's nobody tapping it, but the singer or the lead guitarist is still feeling it underneath there. Hey, this is where that rib cage in the shapes that he makes, it's going away from us there, and here's where that deltoid is shaped like a ball, where the curve would be like that, and the two come together and they make a little pinch there, little pinch. That's what's happening. Look how subtle that little pinch is. That's Bridgman understating. Now, I want to focus on something. Look at the one thing that we can do with simplified forms is we can put one in front of the other. And when we do, we can put a little shade there, and that creates what people have called, Dan Frege is the first person I ever heard mention this, a depth cue. There's two ways to do, there are more than one way to do depth cues. One is to take the thing that goes behind it, watch this, and fade it out as it goes behind it. It's got a little bit of atmospheric perspective, a little steam that throws it behind. Another way is to do the opposite, darken it up and make it cast a shadow. Okay, if it is cast a shadow, I want you to look at this shadow. How much is in there, both as a depth cue? It certainly is the part that makes the arm pop out against the muscles. It also ends up being an abstract shape that looks so uncontrived. It almost looks like a little Arthur Rackham fantasy character. A.B. Frost was working at the same time Bridgman is working, and he was also in the United States. He was a cartoonist. He was a student of he studied the Muybridge plates. He even did a drawing of himself with a Muybridge plate. But notice those human figures in motion. He's not concerned there with accuracy or correctness. This is a character he made up. Look at the exaggeration. Bridgman and A.B. Frost have a lot in common. It's the same kind of drawing, really. It's just taking much more liberty with the figure here. But can you see that he's aware of the ulna? He's aware of the skin stretched over that radius. He puts a little extra line in there to show that that's squashing. Subtle, meant to be funny. Not afraid to foreshorten. Winsor McCay took that from him. Look at that leg coming toward us, and look at the length of no human leg does that. Rackham and Frost and some others, illustrators, were not afraid to distort their figures. Now, this may have a good effect on you even this week. Because you may dare this week to take liberties with the figure. But look at the shape. Look at how this is a piece of composition. It's an arrangement of light and dark, of outlines and tone, of understatement by not showing what becomes the most interesting part of it. Here's why I showed it to you. I know it's a bit of a stretch. I was seeking an excuse to show you A.B. Frost because he was around the same time as Bridgman and a drawer of figures. And these shapes in Bridgman's strongman armpit reminded me of one of Frost's characters. I'm not sure it does now that I've taken that much time on it, but you can find other comparisons. It's sort of like a Japanese tattoo symbol. Or whatever shapes you decide to adapt to create your cast shadow depth cues. And look how a few cast shadow and form shadow depth cues give you as much information as they do to make his arms seem thick and muscular. This shape doesn't look contrived or designed. It almost looks natural. Well, what is it? It's a deltoid. It is a brachialis under there, a coracobrachialis there, a bicep there, a tricep there. A tricep is multi-headed. There's a lot of muscle knowledge in there. And what he's doing is he's giving us a cross contour that is the shape that cast shadow, watch this, might crawl around there. And that cast shadow is telling us that portion of the outside of his rib cage is going away from us there. That curve. Landmarks. Here's an important landmark. Here's the analogous landmark. It's hard, it's bone. The part underneath it is fleshy. And when you lift up your chest like that, and if you do that right now, and you feel how it stretches out your belly muscles, well, it might make sense that it was going to cast a shadow. Look at this shadow. Look at that. That's telling us again that this belly is sort of egg-shaped, the center line sort of ball-shaped. Look over here and look how that line that he put in there is a foreshortened plane. Look over here. He is thinking the way you're doing when you're doing these box analyses. This one is bigger. Why? We see more of this side because that curves this way. Now I'm going to erase my lines and watch how little he gave us to do that. Bigger area there, smaller area there. And curve here. It casts a shadow, like in those My Bridge photos that Bridgman would have known. In fact, let's look. Let's look at photography here. This guy's arm casts a shadow. And because that shadow has a tendency to curve that way, it's telling us that that buttock is shaped this way, where this part of it is closer to us than that part. That curve is a depth cue. Hey, look over here. That's a down plane. And does it cast a shadow? A little bit. Oh, look at this. That's a cast shadow from the light coming this way. Can't get beyond that, and then it throws it over there. It's got a lot of ambient light from the sky to soften it. Look at this one. That is a cast shadow right there. And it tells us that this part of the leg is closer and that part is further away. Hey, here's the one I really wanted you to see in this photograph. It's this. That set of sacrospinalis, look how thick they are here. Why is this sacrospinalis group so thick? And over here, it's so thin. This arm is coming back toward us. And when it comes back toward us, it squishes the sacrospinalis group, which you can see as a line. wow, it's real. This arm over here is going away from us. It's pulling over to the front, which means it's stretching out the muscle that goes over that latissimus dorsi. And that means you are not likely to see this muscle as a group. But here's the thing. That is where the latissimus dorsi originates. And look at how the cast shadow crawls around there. You see that the 140 and 150-year-old photographs have their value. These single source lights create shapes that come from nature. And if you might say, all right, Marshall, you said if you're going to do the human body, you might want to choose your metaphors from something other than a human body, something like architecture or water, which is pretty close because we're mostly water, or rocks or trees or flowers or clouds, and each of them will be a different stylistic flavor. But I want to look at the way shadows happen on single source lighting in sun in California or Hawaii and examine those shapes and just love them enough to say these shapes will be part of my shape language for drawing human figures. Yay! The shadows are interesting in there as abstract shapes. Bridgman knew them. Look on the right. That's the same photograph. I mean, that's the same pose, the same microsecond, pretty much. Look at how there's no hard shadows in there, and yet it's direct sunlight. Look over here from behind her and how hard the shadows get. Why are there so few shadows and hard lines on her? Anyone want to guess? It has to do more with her. Because she doesn't have many hard plane breaks on there. A few. She has gradual plane turns all over the body from this view, and so everything seems softly lit. And also, the light of that particular time of day might have been coming at her like this. Analyzing the light on these, because the light is so simple, is a study. I'm showing you there are a few little hard shadows in there. And an artist, a photographer, can't take those out very well, not if it's from natural light. But an artist, let's go back to the thing that got us going here. An artist chooses where to arrange things. Lights and darks, what to leave out. That series of bumps is where the serratus magnus comes from back around there and interdigitates. It connects with the external oblique. And where is the external oblique? Well, he's chipped just slightly down that way. And so he's chosen to exaggerate that and slightly stretch that. All of these are the things we've been studying. Now, I'm almost done with this. That is a picture where there's very little charcoal on the paper, at least with this reproduction. That is a picture where there is a great deal of knowledge of what the figure has on it. And that is an artist using a trick that only really good artists do, or seem likely to do, which is to understate, to leave out most of it. A thing I don't do. People who lack class are often attracted to people who have it. Let's look at the legs. Lumps, bumps. You could look at that, and if you did not already know knee anatomy, you wouldn't know what it was. Maybe. Now that you're an artist, you might be getting some inspiration that he decided to go in there and leave all of these parts so undeveloped and make a few parts that are dark because it's to him rhythm. And he does know that that is a vastus medialis. And he does know that that's a vastus lateralis. We'll talk a little about those today. And he does know there is a rectus femoris, and there is that goose foot and there is that tibia going down into there. And he does know what we studied yesterday of that medial malleolus of the tibia. And he does know that the croquet wicket angled like that starts to give the foot a certain three-dimensionality. Okay, I've spent a lot of time on this drawing. That's your first assignment, is to go through the Bridgman book, your favorites, and to examine them in light of what you know from having studied that skeleton. And if you have looked at them and said, I see that he's wedging things together, but I don't see how that makes any sense because my leg doesn't do something like that, and my knee is not made out of chiseled wood, and I'm not sure what's going on there. But now you might have an insight. I'm going to pause. Could you draw in the clavicles on the Bridgman Charles Atlas-like figure? Yes, let's do that. Let's draw in the clavicles. Good question. The clavicles. Let's start here. Oh, good thing about the clavicles here. If you're looking down on the rib cage, definitely looking down, watch what will happen. One clavicle will start here and one clavicle will start here. They're about an eyeball apart. That's where the pit of the neck is. If you're looking down on it, on the two of them, you don't want to miss the looking down quality that you're looking down on a round form. And so, since a clavicle goes out and then back, and then out again if we reduce it to straight lines. Out, and then, let's see, back as it goes out, it's going to go more like that, see? And then out a little more. Now we're looking at something that reflects that curve. But in this instance, if we were to look at this strong man from the side, do you see how he is in a position like this where his chest is aiming up? And if our eyeball is here looking at him, we'd be looking up at that chest. You get the idea? We are looking up at that chest. Watch what will happen with the clavicles. Now we've got an egg that we're looking up at, and therefore when the clavicles go out, they don't go up now. We have to keep in mind this, and they'll go down a little bit and then out. Out, down a little bit, and then out. And so we get a bias toward that. So I'm going to elect the clavicle is going like this. That outline right there is clavicle. And then it's tucking back into there. You can almost feel that it's curving like that and then tucking into there. The bias goes that way. In fact, he might not even be thinking of them. He might not be thinking of them as complete clavicles. He may be thinking of them as something that just curves enough to, with subtle lines, give us a sense that we're looking up at that part, because that is underneath the clavicle. That little part that I made blue right here, that is the subclavicular, which means underneath the clavicle. Over here too. That little triangle is subclavicular. Yeah, landmark points, awareness of them. back to this. Look at the difference between this skeleton and this skeleton. My goodness. What about landmark points? Well, he's certainly thinking of something there. What's he thinking of? He's thinking of anterior inferior iliac spine. Well, if he is, how come he's thinking of the anterior superior iliac spine, which is further out on X? Why is he making that move in on X?
Because he chose to.
There's the sternum. There is the collective set of clavicles. There is a corner of the rib cage. Gosh, that's not like any corner of the rib cage I've ever seen. No, that isn't the corner of the rib cage. That is the corner. No, it isn't the corner of the rib cage. I'm not sure. Well, let's see. That looks like a corner of the rib cage. That looks like a corner of the rib cage. It's somewhere around there. Yeah. How about that leg? Oh, that leg is rough. That leg is rough because I don't see the evidence of what's going on with that knee. But let's fade those back and start with the landmark points. Is there a patella? Yeah, there's a patella, but it sure doesn't look like a patella. In fact, he's done the opposite of what a patella does. A patella is unquestionably convex to the front, and it also is unquestionably narrower at the base. From the front, it's shaped something like this. Narrower at the bottom. And instead, what is he doing? Oh, it also goes down to a ligament that goes to the nose of the tibia like that. And the distance between the patella and the nose of the tibia is 1 patella's height on a human, more on most animals. So he knows that. And instead, he's given us something that a patella that spreads apart like this. And then instead of going to a single point, it spreads out like this, and it receives something underneath it that goes wider. It doesn't seem to have any relationship to what we know about anatomy. Is it because he was ignorant?
Not on our lives.
It's because he chose to treat it that way. He said the whole quadriceps group, which we'll look at toward the end of the day today, that whole quadriceps group, I'm going to make it roundish here, egg-shaped here, and then I've changed my mind. I'm going to make this part turn into these 2x4s. What's going on? It's a choice. That's why I'm encouraging you to experiment. Look at the fibula. We know that's an outside leg because that's where the fibula is. Oh, it's far back. That's something we didn't see yesterday. David Rubens makes a line from the patella to where the iliotibial band goes in, to the fibula where that biceps femoris is going to be, and he says there's an angle like that on the side. Well, Bridgman has got an iliotibial band, a patella, and he's got an angle like that. I think that's conscious. Notice there's a superhero boot there. Wait a second. Shouldn't it be the opposite of that? If this is coming toward us, how do we know it's coming toward us? Watch the line, see? That's a block coming toward us like that. And then look what he's done. He's put a line like that to tell us that this thing called a foot there is going to roll over like that and then peak out. It'll flatten down here. So why did he give us a line like that? I don't know. But it looks as if he's got a boot that might be lower at the front. What about this one? This will be the last of these, and then I'll just point out that this is your job now, to go through the book and do the same thing I'm doing here. Orientation, first of all, scientific skeleton, artistic skeleton. Look at the proportions. Look at how huge he decides his ribcage is going to be and how small that is. Can you believe the discrepancy between these two? Permission, everybody. Permission. Make up your own proportions. Now, what do we have? We have a thing we didn't talk about yesterday. We have a bump right here. That arm has been spun around like so to where the lateral epicondyle. Now you say, okay, I got it. That's a medial epicondyle that you've been talking about. No, that's a lateral epicondyle, which would normally be spun around and on the lateral side. But he has spun, watch the arrow, he has spun it around this way to where the outside is there. And then the ulna goes down like that to the little finger side of the wrist. And the radius goes over to the other side. The bump of the lateral epicondyle is a landmark point that I didn't even mention yesterday. And because he knew how to spin this around so that what was on the outside comes to the inside, since a ball and socket joint, we're going to get to that in about 5 minutes. We're going to put energy into that, about how these ball and socket joints can spin on that axis and how this hinge joint can spin on this axis. The machinery of the body and movement. Hey, he's got another thing in there. We said there's the ulna, that's the elbow. That's this bump right here. That's that bump in there that we don't see very well. We've got a lateral epicondyle. We've got an end of the ulna. That's a straight line. From one position, that's the straightest line of any bone on the body. And we've got a little bone in there. Anyone remember what the little bone in there was? The pisiform bone. What about the leg? Oh, the leg. What a beautiful leg. Well, we've got a fibula, and it's back here. And the biceps femoris aims right for it. We've got a patella. He's reminding us we do. And he's got it chiseled like a rock. We've got a nose of the tibia. And we've got it right about there, and he's got a line that goes down into there, and he overlaps it with the extensor group. We've got an Achilles tendon that comes down to a calcaneus. This is your job in the next day or two to go through these, examine them. Don't expect them to be accurate. If you are confused, just say, that's life. Nature is more contradictory and difficult to understand than Bridgman's drawings. So if you're having a hard time making sense out of the craziness of life, you might start with Bridgman's drawings. They're easier. Hey, here's something else you can do. Why not make an arm that goes back? It's doable. And you could bring the other part of the arm back behind her back, or you could say, no. I have spun that humerus so that her arm will go out like this and it will come back toward us like this. And she'll reach out like that to tickle him on the other side. Do that several ways because he's giving you an opportunity to. This arm looks to me like it's coming forward. And you could certainly play that way, but you could say, no, I'm deciding I'm going to make her pulling something behind her. Both of those arms could be going back. Play with this. Add arms and then ask, this does look like it's going forward. If I went back there, how would it change? How would it pull fibers back in the other direction? And goose foot of the tibia and curve of the tibia and medial malleolus and lateral malleolus and etc. Go through your Bridgman collection and seek every bone landmark. What else? With your stick figure skeletons, analyze the types and axes of joint movement. And if you can, clarify with drawings. We've got two issues, analyzing and drawing. Analyzing can happen entirely in your mind. Let's say I'm not going to draw, I'm just going to analyze. What do I care about? The name of that joint. If you're a mechanical engineer, you know a great deal about it. If you've worked with robotics, you know a great deal about it. I had a student just this last year who was so interested in animal skeletons and turning them into forms that by the end of the semester, he wanted to know more about every kind of movement and how it happens, like if you're going to construct machinery. That's what we're doing, machinery, skeletons as machines. I didn't really know where to point him, but I did point him toward that robotics class for the great courses. And I think from there he got a bibliography and a lot of other stuff. The types of joints, and here's what I'm going to spend 15, 20 minutes on. The axes of joint movement using student work. Gabriella, in this class, where we'd spend 18 weeks on anatomy. And this was about halfway through, where you're doing skeletons as forms. And apparently this character is holding a hoop from the photograph she used. And that's great. Learning about what will happen with that scapula that will also bunch up the fibers. Learning that this got swiveled that way, which will bunch up the fibers of the trapezius and the levator of the scapula and the other ones that are working on there. That's going to happen after we've learned the bones, how to put the muscles on them. But this one's a great one. This is great partly because she was using a photograph for the model there. And it was taken from a stage where you could look up down here. So you're looking up, and that's a wide angle effect. And a wide angle effect is very problematic when it comes to doing these studies. You're probably better off using MyBridge or something where the camera is distant. But those of you who say, I've done these form analyses, I'm getting bored, I want to get on to something else. Here's something you could do. Take pictures with your smartphone where things get really small as they go away and really big. Look at how my hand, if you're looking at the picture of me, my hand is bigger than my entire rib cage in the camera. That's what happens when you get up close. Proximity effect. But I want you to see something about this. If we get in close on this, Gabriella is aware that this foot, her left foot, on a ground plane, is coming more toward us. If we were to fit it in a box, it's coming more toward us than this one over here, which is coming less toward us. Watch what I do. This next line is important. You say, that's not the same line she put on there. She went down, you're going up. I'm making a point. This is less toward us. This is more toward us. Yeah, she is tipping it another way. Let's do it the way she's doing it. That line right there, look how severe an angle it makes. But either way, whether we're looking down on this box or whether we're looking up at this box, this front is barely facing us. This front is facing us more. How do I keep that in line? How do I know that? This kneecap is facing more toward us. Let's do it as a simplification. That kneecap is certainly to our left, facing toward us. This kneecap is more to our left, facing toward us, so we'd see more of the side of it. That front plane is more foreshortened. That front plane is less foreshortened. How do we do that? Let me show you. This is rough. But when a person stands with their feet coming toward us, we must remember that their feet don't stick directly out in front of them. Their feet, watch the next line. This is an important line. I'm going to switch to blue to make the point. Their legs are as if they are around a cylinder, that one part will face directly toward us. One part might face out to the right. One might part face out to the left. Watch this. One might go straight out there. One will go back in another direction, and we can't even see its origin on there. You get the idea. This is a three-dimensional form, or the illusion of one. Well, watch. The foot here will go more that way, and the foot here will come more directly toward us, and we will see different planes. How can I be thinking of all of that? One kneecap goes there, and one kneecap goes, oh, it's looking right at me. How am I ever going to deal with that? That's why we study perspective and form. To be able to look up like that, to be able to look down like that, to be able to see that we've just created a wide-angle lens effect on a great big form like that, to see the big arcs as well as the small forms. I'm sorry to tell you that that is the way that the pianist is able to interpret the Beethoven sonata from the beginning to the end and make the emotion so powerful, is that they know the whole environment of that four-movement piece, and they can compose within it. That's part of what you're doing. It takes a complex understanding of music. But I'm going to introduce you to what you can do with this. In 2 days from now, you can start tonight. Try drawing an arm and saying it should be 2 head widths if it's not foreshortened. And then swivel your arm to decide where is the lateral epicondyle and where is the medial epicondyle. And the medial epicondyle is likely to be inside like that. And then you could take the forearm out to there, or you could bring the forearm back to here and have this person gesture that way. You could bring the other arm from that ball and socket joint there and then make it thick. Is it coming toward us? Is it going away from us, or is it a pure side? Let's bring one toward us. Let's have a lateral epicondyle and a medial epicondyle. Let's have an elbow now going away from us to a little finger side of the wrist. I'm making the lines to be sure that's going away from us. We could bring the radius into the supinated position, and that way the thumb would be over there. Or we could do the other thing, which is to have the radius cross over. He doesn't explain this nearly as well as other books do, where the thumb would be on this side and the fingers would be on that side. Stick figure stuff, and then when you get a grip on a number of stick figures, here's what we do next. If this leg, which is a hinge joint primarily, it's not a pure hinge joint, but if from the side the femur goes like this, and the lower leg goes like that, and the foot goes like that, if from the side, how far can that lower leg go? It can go to straight. This could go all the way to straight. If it straightens it, it would lift that up. And it can flex quite a bit. But do you notice that if we do that from the side, we are making a circle around a center? What would happen if it's in this position? Well, in this position, whatever that ellipse is, if it's at all correct, that would let us know that it is going to curve in a way that if you were an animator, I'm sorry that I did not get the perspective right. Be more like that. Then we'd be able to track where that foot would land as it goes up there, and how it would start to get really long down there. We would see the arc of the entire leg. And it would be movement in the sagittal plane where the X lines would all stay consistent. Remember, this is the sagittal plane. Movement in the sagittal plane where every X line, unless the foot's twisting, is all going to go the same way. Oh, that's convenient. Let's try another kind of movement. This is a ball and socket joint. As a ball and socket joint, it could move all sorts of different ways. One way it could move is that you could lift it up even further, not much further. You'd end up having to spin the scapula. At some point, it can only go so far. But you see, it could go. That lateral epicondyle there. Excuse me, that's actually the ulna. It looks a little confusing. Here, let me fix it. There we go. That radius should be coming from the... that's a little bit misplaced. Radius is coming from the outside. Okay, that might help to do what I want you to see is that this elbow could lift up and that elbow can go down. And where is it going down from? It's going from this ball and socket joint, which can only go up so far, but it would make a great big ellipse that would come out there to the front. That would be also movement, in this case, pretty much on the sagittal plane. But what else could we do? We could also spin it this way. That would be movement for the body. That would be pretty much movement in the coronal plane. Not purely, because it's not necessarily straight back, but it's spinning this way. What would happen? Now watch what would happen. Since it's a ball and socket joint and it can spin that way, if she spins this way, what's going to happen? It's going to take this condyle, move it up there, and completely change the position of where this hand goes. Now that bone is going to come out here because we had a ball and socket joint that could move around on that axis, and it could move around on this axis. It could also be around on this axis, on an axis that's going through there like that, as well as an axis going through there like that. And what do we have left? We have the transverse axis. And the transverse axis would be like this. And that's where Luca's question about how much spin is going to go on in there. That's a part of what we're doing. Let's see if there's any other ones that might make a difference. Let's do the on the coronal axis. She could spin her leg that way. How would it happen? It would happen mainly up here in the ball and socket joint. This is a hinge joint. This is a pure hinge joint. Pure hinge joint. No movement that you're going to get that isn't on that axis. This is mainly a hinge joint. But up here, that leg could go any one of a number of directions. I think we might go back to this one. Oh, I got an idea. Here's how to do it. If that's a ball and socket joint, which means let's do a ball up here. We're going to seek the movement on the transverse axis. We could do a movement on the coronal axis, which we sort of did. And we could do one on the, it's not the axis, the plane. There we go. Now watch. Because that's a ball and socket joint, she could swing this around to the front, and it might make an arc. Sorry, the Wacom tablet is for me just really kind of a crazy phenomenon, but I'll give enough of it. If that were an ellipse, you'd get the idea that you would need to track how it would go around what axis. Watch up here, this one, the equator line. And she could bring it right toward us where it's coming toward us, and it'd be extremely foreshortened. And it would come out there, and then we could get it going forward, and it would not be foreshortened. Or it doesn't even have to be that. It could be that as she swings it around, she's going to swing it down. And then she'll be swinging it on an axis that goes like this. The point of this is a challenge. The point of it is go through your stick figure skeletons, analyze the types and axes of joint movement, and if you can, clarify with drawings. If you can't, at least give them some thought. Do you see how that could have been a straight up and down arm, but it got swung on an ellipse like that? If she were to make it go directly away from us, look how short it would be, how foreshortened it would be. In fact, that would be a lot like what we saw going on with this. How can a leg that is this long suddenly become that long? Because he's aware that it is spreading out. If you were in a top view, one leg would be going out that way, and one leg would be going out that way, and our eye is right here, and it sees that leg on our left as a sliver, and the leg on our right as a long leg. Perspective and axes applied to the limbs. On the most basic level, the bones, the stick figure bones. The muscles are coming in a few minutes. Okay, I'm gonna whine late middle-aged, early old age whining from this era. When I wanted to learn this stuff as a student, nobody I could find would teach it. Colleges were filled with teachers who didn't know any of this. I didn't know any of it until my 30s. And the amount of time wasted on discussions of how do you learn to draw the figure was pretty much wasted. People weren't arguing about this in the last 600 years if you wanted to draw the illusion of three-dimensional figures. It's just you learn a few things, and anatomy and perspective fused together. That's what a big bunch of this is. That's what Bridgman is teaching. If you're good at this, reposition masses or limbs and test the range of motion. What's that mean? Okay, a few minutes here on the range of motion. The best book that I know of, that I've read every word of, on range of motion is Goldfinger's, and his stuff on animal ranges of motion is really remarkable. And what he shows you, range of motion is often called ROM, is that you can only lift your humerus up so far before a bump on it touches a bump on the other side of that acromion process. And it will go at about a right angle, different on different people, by the way, but see, about a right angle to this medial border. And then if you want to keep lifting your arm, you don't lift your arm, you lift your shoulder blade. You spin your shoulder blade and it lifts the arm up. You can only lift your arm so far because there's a limit to the range of motion. Now, this book is not cheap, but it is a reference standard book. It took me 6 months to read, but I read it and understood it all. And it's not one to start with for reading. It's very good for plates. So if you don't try to read it, but you just look at the plates as a beginner, the plates look like this. There's a cheap way to learn the range of motion completely. What's the cheap way? Yourself. That's why we struck poses. For some reason, a lot of artists don't like to get up on their feet. Animators, writers, artists, sculptors do. Kids do. You can get up on your feet and test your own range of motion. You can get those Muybridge photographs and see, could you push it any further and what would happen? Can you pull him back any further and what would happen? There is a video that I own. I have this DVD and I haven't watched it, but Stan bought it also and he watched it. He said it was very good. It shows you the extremes of and how different people's bones allow them to move more or less. reposition masses or limbs, testing range of motion. You're doing your own research. You can look it up, seek extremes, see if you can push them beyond. Place muscle groups. Name and roughly place the various large muscle groups. I haven't taught you them formally. This is where it would help if you were studying anatomy to know all the names of the bones and muscles, but we're going to give a little attention to this. We're going to start with the ones we already did. Look at what Bridgman gives us for his skeleton that is supposed to match this. It's a little different though, isn't it? It's a little different because this guy is clearly a beach ball facing to our right, whereas this one is not. Facing more directly at us. Okay, good. We wouldn't have been able to understand that before we studied some lines on balls, some sagittal sections, some cross contours, some rubber bands. Okay? But let's go to this and say we know that from the cartilaginous portion of the rib cage to the symphysis pubis, there is a double-sided muscle that in itself is symmetrical. That's the rectus abdominis. We know that from a number of these ribs here, there is a teardrop that sits on top of that crest, and that is the external oblique. We know that. So we would look for that. We would look for where we would place these on one of our skeletons. One of our stick figure skeletons, even if we do it poorly. Anything else we've studied on the front? No, but we're going to right now. We have what people call a chest muscle. It's purely an arm muscle. It's going to insert into the arm, but it's going to originate from three places. One is half of the clavicle. It's going to aim down and connect there. And then there's several portions of it that start at the sternum. And those strands are going to aim to the same place on that humerus. And then there's a portion down here on this cartilage, and it's going to aim up and tuck underneath this. Now that's interesting. The top fibers go the lowest on the arm, and the low fibers go the highest on the arm. Anyone know why the pectoralis major does that? If it didn't, if the top part went to the top part and the low part went to the low part, it would be so hard to to lift your arm. But when this top part goes to the low part, this can unfold and they will not cross over. When it's lifted up, they would be straight. It's an ingenious design. Now, you can get that from any of these anatomy books. All of them are going to show you about how the pectoralis goes from the sternum and the clavicle and the rib cage, and it goes into a position on the arm, and it lifts or pulls the arm forward because it anchors here and it pulls us forward. But we haven't talked about the shape of it as a form. How does he treat it? He treats it, as many artists have treated it, like a washboard, sort of bent around. It's got a bit of a down plane there. It's like an open book. I never even noticed that metaphor before. The pectoralis is an open book. That's the form of it. Can you put some lumps on the chest that are arm muscles and have an idea of where they go from and to? What's another? Let's see. We said that the medial half of the clavicle will hold the top fibers of the pectoralis. And then the outer third and all the way around to the back will be a muscle that goes out and almost halfway down there on the deltoid tuberosity. And that will be, if our eye is up here, that'll have a cross contour that goes like that. And if our eye is down here, it'll have a cross contour that goes like that. Look at how that looks thick. We saw that on the back of the neck, there was a muscle that will come down here and roll over. Those are the traps. Could we put a couple of lumps on there for the traps? There is that medial epicondyle. There's a bicep. It's going to come from up on here, and it's going to spread out, and it never even connects. It never connects to the upper arm bone. It goes right down there into the radius. And if our eye is down here, we see it as something like that. It's like a long Twinkie in this position. And if our eye is up here, we would see it as something like that. And we'd have a deltoid tucking behind it. Well, the forearm muscles, as you know, if you've studied them, they're complex. Bridgman is so aware, turning them into shapes. There's that bicep. There is what's called the ridge group. He even makes this line, which is almost the line of the radius bone. And this group of flexors that go from the medial epicondyle that make a great big egg, the biggest and strongest part of your forearm, and go into the wrist. That's the flexor group. Can't see the extensor group, but you'll see a ridge group there. Over here, the flexor group, because it goes from the medial epicondyle into the palm, will disappear behind that ridge group. So you'll get this little part where the bicep cuts into those two parts. You don't have to do this accurately. You can do this as a beginner by learning that there is a group of muscles on the front of the thigh called the quadriceps. There they are. But there's 4 of them. Well, there's only 3 that we care about. And they're coming toward us. Good, that gets you started. And what happens here? And what happens here? Here's where we're going to separate them from another group. We're going to say that one starts at the inferior iliac spine and goes into the knee, and it's the one that sits on top, the big fish muscle, the rectus femoris. And one of them is going to swell out and have a tight cord there. And one of them is going to swell in and have a loose cord there. And that is the 3 quadriceps that we care about, and we could say they're coming toward us. But if all you get is a football like this, that's good enough. A lump of American United States football shape. Actually not. That goes from pelvis and underneath there at the femur into there. Just get a shape like that. And you've got the front calf or front thigh muscles, the quadriceps. What else on that front? We'll take those up in detail later. Hey, there's the longest muscle in the body that separates up here at the anterior superior iliac spine. It separates the quadriceps group from another lump that's like a football in there, the adductors. That's this group here. There's several of them, but we're not trying to do individual muscles here. We're trying to say there is more than one muscle on the front of the thigh and the inside of the thigh. And then when we come down to here, we're going to see that is a calf group on the back of the leg, a calf group on the back of the leg. This is all bone. I'll switch to blue for it. This is all bone. in here. That's bone very foreshortened. And then there's a group called the extensors that we'll look at in more detail. You can study them this week. And if that's coming toward us, they'd be an egg shape like that. And if that's going away from us, that rubber band would go that way. However you want to, with a marker, with whatever you've got, there is our rectus abdominis. Somewhere along here, there is our external oblique. I'll teach you the hip muscles next time we join. We've got a gluteus medius and a gluteus maximus and a tensor. But if you can think of all of them together as just a big lump of hip muscles, a great big football for the quadriceps. Let's go down here below. Watch from the side. Quadriceps group pulls on that knee this way, straightens it. There's another group behind them. Bridgman has great drawings of this, by the way. Bridgman's are my favorite drawings of hamstrings and quads and knees. Like a pair of ice tongs that is going to reach and when that pulls, that will flex the leg. Let's go over here. From there to there, quadriceps. From deep in there to there, hamstrings. From up here on the back of those wheels, on the back of those condyles, a calf muscle comes out, goes into a common tendon with another muscle, the soleus underneath it, the calf group. That pulls the heel to bring you up on your toes. And then a whole big group of 6 muscles that we can name. I don't know that we'll name all 6 of them, but you can name them. The extensor group and the little stirrup that goes underneath there. That is part of your work this week. Look at those skeletons. See if you can place. Looking at the plates, you don't have to make this up. This is a study to at least be familiar with them. And if you want to start with the leg, that might be best because that's what we're going to study next week. By the way, it's really useful to do this on animals. Because, see, they've got a tricep that goes in there. And they've got a ridge group that goes like this. And they've got an elbow that goes like that. And they've got a quadricep group that goes in there. And they've got hamstrings that go way lower than ours. And so I have students do analyses of animals like this. And then put that quadriceps group on there. And get a rubber band around it. Get that hamstring group there and get a rubber band around it. Get that calf muscle on there and those extensor groups. And you end up with really you can get some really good analogies that can help you in your figure drawing, in your human figure drawing. Okay, there it is. Place muscle groups. Name and roughly place the various large muscle groups. We will examine them more next week. If you're saying you have left me to do muscle groups that I don't know yet. I showed you some. Get your anatomy books out. Don't study every fiber. Study where they start and where they end. If you have access to a skeleton, this skeleton has been an important part of my life. He has a name. He was part of my a friend of my son through his early childhood. If you're ambitious, you go through Goldfinger's book for 6 months or however long it takes, and you make a mark on every bone where a muscle starts and where a muscle ends. Doesn't necessarily mean you'll be a better artist. Just means that you'll know the anatomy really well. You find every muscle on your body. One of the things that you are finding, now that we're 3/4 of the way through, is that this is hard work. I encourage you to have fun, but I know, but by the time I let you go to the next session that we have, if you're doing these projects, you are involved in some serious brain cell burning. But a reminder, you are not alone. If you say, okay, this is muscles week, I'm going to learn them. I'm going to see if I can put them on my stick skeletons. I did a lot of work on those stick skeletons. Part of it was so that I can put these lumps of clay on here. If you get them wrong, that means that you'll come in next week. Here we are. We did body as machine, bones and muscles. We'll come in, we'll do the hip joint and the leg muscles and forms. The more you get familiar with them in advance, the easier it is on your brain, so you're not trying to take it in all at once. You can do the class any way you want. You don't have to do any of these exercises. You don't get graded. But if you do them, you are not alone. I look at this map after hours, and I think about it. George never dreamed it possible. That has been session 9. We've got 10, 11, 12. Let's look quickly again. Hip joint and leg muscles and forms. As I've mentioned before, his analyses of legs are some of the strangest and some of my favorite drawings in the world. He does things with them nobody ever seems to have dared to, the way he chisels them. Just adoring them would be worth your time, but being inspired by them is another thing. Next Friday, shoulder mechanics, arm muscles and forms. And then we'll go back and compare hands and feet and see some of his shortcuts. Okay, see you next Thursday. That was session 9 from our 12-session bootcamp in 2020. If you want more videos, live session announcements, and updates on everything, they're at my website, marshallart.com. Subscribe.